probably goes without saying that as a programmer, you need to edit files. You need to change files. You need to write a lot of text, right? And you're going to need an editor for that. And we've talked about using the raw editor in GitHub. We've talked about using the github.dev editor. But to be fair, we want to put something, we want to talk about having something on your desktop. There's a couple of topics related to what is the best editor for programming. This is probably one of the most problematic, clickbaity kind of titles that you're ever going to see from me. And there's a reason that the editors that I'm going to talk about are there. And there's going to be all kinds of hate in the comments because probably one of the most emotional topics that anybody can ever bring up on any kind of stream is what is your editor. In fact, I used to ask that question when vetting candidates for to work in tech. When I worked at Nike.com and I was asked to be the technical subject matter expert and vet the new candidates to see whether, how good they were. And one of the questions that I would almost always ask is, what is your editor and why did you use it? And believe it or not, I mean, is that enough information to know whether someone's going to be a good developer? No, but it definitely gives an insight into how their brain is working, what kind of coding they prefer, what their workflow is based on, whether they're going to be able to integrate well with the team that I'm on, depending on how they get their work done. So the question about what editor to use and how to install it and all of that thing is a very telling question. And I do have a story about this. So the story is one of the guys that I mentored. He was actually a psychology major who couldn't get a job and spent a couple of years with me, and then ended up getting a salary job for $100,000 a year. And he was selected to be one of the interns in the first round, and then he was hired after being an intern. And during his job interview, I've told the story before, but during his job interview, the person giving him the interview apologized for using their editor, and saying, "Oh, I only use this." And the person that was being interviewed was using an editor that the interviewer considered to be an indication of being superior, because the choice of editor is whether I like it or not, whether you like it or not. In the tech world, the editor that you choose says a lot about you, and it carries a lot of weight. And the kind of editor same with Linux distributions or languages you choose to learn, all of these things. But the editor that you pick says a lot about you. And it can actually, the editor you pick can actually be considered a flex depending on the circumstances. So we're not going to really get into that, but I really want you to understand it, because if you could end up, I know this is really horrible to say it, but you could end up tanking, your rep with a particular group because, you didn't say the right editor. Now, for the record, I think that if somebody's going to judge you based on your editor for a job position, that they should no longer be working in that company and they should not be in charge of hiring people, because your editor, at the end of the day, most of the time, 9 times out of 10, the editor that you use and you choose to use does not impact your ability to perform most tech jobs. However, there are a couple very specific positions that critically depend on specific editors and being able to use them. And that is a really good opportunity for me to actually wrap up this video. Okay, so does your editor matter? Your editor absolutely does matter. Okay, so let's actually dive in before the video is completely over. And let's talk about what is the best editor for the job and what editor should you pick in general, depending on the job and whether you need to learn it or not. And I'm going to go through all of the main editors. I'm not going to talk about the edge case editors really right now. I'm going to talk about the main editors. So here they are. The absolute number one editor on the planet right now is Visual Studio Code. Everybody uses it, and we'll do another video where we install it. But here it is, Visual Studio Code. And this relates to, as soon as you download Visual Studio Code, the first thing you'll notice is that Visual Studio Code is the same. It's exactly the same as github.dev. We will be downloading this editor. I'll do a video about that. And this is what we're going to be doing, our web development in Visual Studio Code. Let's talk about that. Why is Visual Studio Code the best editor for that kind of thing? Or VS Codium. Here we go. We got people with opinions already. VS Codium, just so you know, is a free version of Visual Studio Code. It's not owned by Microsoft. That is not particularly better. It's just different. People have very, very strong opinions on that. They do not want Microsoft telemetry. They don't want to give Microsoft credit, even though Microsoft built, Visual Studio Code from scratch. It's using a bunch of graphics technologies. It's using. I don't really want to get into it. It's using Electron, which is a very controversial technology with regard to bloat and amount of memory usage. And actually, Electron is responsible for lots of applications that you may not even know about, but definitely VS Code. So it doesn't matter. None of that matters. You are a beginner, and I'm talking to you, and you must learn. I'm telling you, as a beginner, if you have never even tried out Visual Studio Code, people will look at you askance. They'll look at you like, you've never used VS Code ever? You never even fired it up to try it out? No. So even if you don't like it, even if you totally hate it and you don't think it's the best tool for your job, which would be my case, even for web development, I do not use it. There's a good chance you're going to need to use it. There's another good reason that you might be able to. A lot of beginners love it. I actually, full disclosure, Visual Studio Code has a built-in shared coding environment strategy. And actually, for several years, in 2020 and 21, I met with the core team of the Visual Studio Code project to give feedback, because they were developing their pair programming, where you have two people literally with little cursors jumping around all over the screen. It's really cool. And I was able to use that from my desk, and they were coding from their desk. And as a mentor, I was able to literally show them where they should code and where they should code elsewhere. And if you're doing any kind of remote mentoring with like one-on-one or one-on-two, it's absolutely fantastic for that. Now, there are other ways to do this using the terminal and other things, and we'll talk about that as well. But out of the gate, Visual Studio Code is extremely powerful for collaborative editing. So that, remember we talked about best tool for the job, right? Why you might want to pick this editor. If you're working with a team that's doing a bunch of collaboration and that's doing this kind of thing where they're all you need to be able to look at the same code at the same time. And that's really up to you to decide if that's even needed. If you're using something like Git and GitHub, then you can just share that and you can see all those commits in the PR process, and you don't really need that real-time editing, right? Another huge advantage of Visual Studio Code, of course, is that it's localized. That means you're running it on your computer. And I want to pause on this point, because there is a huge movement. I'll make another video about it, but I'm just going to say, don't use cloud-based editors. It's a bad idea. What happens when you're in the airplane? What happens when you're outside of range? How are you going to work on your code? You can't, right? So if your team or you are dependent on the internet to do your development, you will fail. The whole point of Git is to be able to I'll make a whole video on that. Just don't do it. Visual Studio Code is a local editor. You download it, you install it, you run it, and you synchronize your changes up to the cloud, and then other people can pull down your changes. And when you want to, you can actually, if you're online, you can collaborate with a bunch of other people. There are two other really spectacularly great reasons to use Visual Studio Code. One of them is already one that we saw when we were doing our previewing. Let me show you again, if I can find it. Where are you? Here we go. So this is Visual Studio Code running in the web browser. As this is, we talked, there's another video about this. This is github.dev, right? So this is reason number two. So it's not just the collaboration and the fact that it's, GUI and friendly. It's over here, you got live previews, right? Including images, and that's where that Elliott images came from before. So you have live previewing of tables and all kinds of good stuff. Oops, that's not it. Here we go. There you go. There's the live previewing. So live previewing is a major reason to use Visual Studio Code. And the third one, I can't immediately show you. We're going to do a whole video on this. The third one is because Visual Studio Code comes with lots of extensions, and Some people will say the extensions are a downside. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of extensions you can add. And by the way, if you add too many of those extensions, you end up blowing up, right? It takes you forever for your editor to run. But those extensions are a very solid reason to use VS Code. The extensions in a world of graphical editors, I was going to say graphics is one of the advantages, but that's kind of a given. In the world of graphical editing, having an extension is a very valuable thing. For example, we're going to use an extension called Live Preview, which contains its own little teeny tiny web server so that you can, on your computer without any internet connection, you can preview any web development. In fact, I used this at a private school at Woodlawn there was an after school program for 40, 50 people, and they were all doing game development, web game development, and they were able to do it using Phaser.js, which I'll make another video about, because they were hosting from their own laptops. So they had live server running. Every time they made a change to their game, it immediately refreshed their web browser and it showed the new game changes immediately, whether it be dragging in a new skin for their platformer avatar or whatever. It immediately showed them the changes. So the extensions, including live stream, the live previewing, those are fantastic ways to do that. Can that be done with Notepad++? Notepad++ is another relatively minimalistic one. Let me mention the other ones. I spend a lot of time on VS Code because that's the one I recommend. But let me mention, just so you at least know they exist, about a half dozen other graphical-y kinds of editors that I do not recommend. So the one that started it all is called Sublime. That is a combination of C++ and Python. It's highly proprietary. It hasn't gone through any updates in a very long time. Sublime, Sublime, gets the credit for inspiring this minimalistic editor kind of world. It is still a great editor, but if you read through the news groups, it's not being maintained. The core contributors got really pissed off because the person's refusing to do it because it's highly proprietary. It's a pretty fair, I don't know that it's ever been officially said, but it's pretty fair to say that Microsoft copied verbatim the look and feel of Sublime, which was the first lightweight code editor, graphical code editor. And then you've got all of the other ones in the same vein. You have Adobe Brackets, which is just Adobe's version of the same thing. You have, what's the other one? Emacs is not graphical. Absolutely not. No, it isn't. And we'll talk about Emacs, and when we talk about terminal editors, we'll get into that. So those are the main editors. Atom, that's the one. Thank you for reminding me. So Atom, people still use Atom a lot. So the editors that are in the same vein, that are head to head against each other, are Visual Studio Code. And please don't forget Code at the end. Visual Studio is a completely different beast. You don't even want to look at that thing unless you're doing C++ or C development for Microsoft projects, in my opinion, or .NET perhaps. You just don't want to mess with that. So VS Studio Code, right? And then you have Sublime, which inspired it. You have Brackets, which is Adobe's. You have Atom, and they're all largely the same. They're all very much the same sort of thing. So in terms of a graphical browser, we talked about the reasons to use a graphical browser and which graphical browser for you to pick up and which one to use. There's the other editor graphical browsers you might hear of is something called Eclipse, which is usually primarily a Java technology. It's really old, and you probably won't be required to use that unless you're working for a company doing Java development, but that probably doesn't include you. So VS Studio Code, and that is the world of graphical browsers. Now, we're going to in the same video, I probably should break this up, but I'm not going to. Now let's cover JetBrains. Okay, that's a good one. So I'm glad let's stay with the graphic browsers. I forgot JetBrains completely. So if you're doing Go development, there are all the JetBrains stuff. There's GoLand. When it comes to what's the Kotlin browser? What's the Kotlin browser? PHP Storm, JetBrains. God, what is it? I forget the other one. Anyway, JetBrains makes great editors. GoLand is arguably the best graphic editor for Go. Many real serious Go pros use it. I don't. I'm a command line guy, which we'll get to that in a second. Idea. I forget it. There's Kotlin is another is a brand of Java. It's not Java. It's its own language. So that's a thing. I'm somebody else in the comments. If I miss I'm obviously I'm going to miss a lot of editors, right? So please put the editors in the comments that I have missed. The main takeaway from this in terms of graphical ones is the purpose of this video has been here's why I think you should use a graphical editor on occasion and the main reasons to use one, and here's why I think that VS Studio Code is the best one, not just the most popular. I still think it's the best. Okay, and then the Eclipse and NetBeans, yeah. And then, so the rest of this video from now on out is going to be about terminal-based editors. And I was going to make a separate video about terminal-based editors, but I'm just going to mention them right now because inevitably somebody's going to run across this video and go, why didn't you mention blah, 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 blah. And I'm going to tell you right now, we are not going to dig down deep into the terminal-based browsers because we haven't covered the terminal yet, okay? Obviously, the most popular of the terminal-based browser, did I say browser? I meant editor. The most popular of the terminal-based editors continues to be NeoVim. I do not like NeoVim. I'm a Vim guy, and Vim is the one you need to learn. Vim is by far the most popular. NeoVim is a newfangled version of Vim that is nice and all, but it diverges from Vim in ways that are not required. All the advantages of a terminal-based browser are fundamentally how well does it work with the system, not can I have a graphic user? Can I have a everything from my graphic user browser, in my GUI browser editor? Everything from my GUI editor, can I not have that also as in my terminal-based, editor? And my biggest complaint about terminal-based editor picks is that people pick terminal editors using the same criteria that they would use for a graphical editor. And at a certain point, you should just use, VS Code with extensions, right? And so the two oldest and biggest, the biggest fight in the terminal land have been VI versus Emacs. And that fight has been going back to the 1980s, late 80s, right? So Emacs, which is all things to all people, versus a VI, which is a visual mode of a command line terminal ed, which has been on every single Unix system since it was invented, which is one of the reasons I think you should learn it. And we're going to talk about that a lot when we get to the terminal. I tell you what, man, when you're talking about, like terminal selection, you're talking about a holy war. I mean, you can literally have people like threaten violence over, telling them that their terminal-based editor is bad and attacking them. I mean, they get really, really bent out of shape. And, Richard Stallman, who invented Emacs, has been, pushing it forever. He calls VI the number of the beast. It's Satan and all kinds of stuff. Look, VI is on every system. Emacs is not. And my primary criteria for use of a terminal-based editor is how likely am I to find it on the system and how easily can I add it if it is not on the system. And, Ed, which is literally the standard Unix editor, its visual mode is VI. So I think VI and Vim should be the very first things you should learn. In fact, you should learn Ed as well. You should learn, this is my we're going to go through this later. We're going to learn Ed. We're going to learn Ed. We're going to learn VI. Then we're going to learn Vim, and then we'll look at NeoVim on top of that. And if you layer them on top of each other like that, you'll end up knowing how each one works, and you can decide how much customization you want to have, because you're not going to find NeoVim on any system ever. You're going to have to install it. So whereas VI might very likely be on every system you ever use. So when you use a terminal-based editor, the selection criteria, in my opinion, changes dramatically, right? If you know that you're only going to be, you just prefer the terminal over a graphic user interface, and you know you're going to be on that system forever, and you're going to customize one single container or one single system or one single desktop Linux machine or whatever, you know you're going to be on that system. Maybe you're a physicist, maybe you're a machine learning person, maybe you're a game developer. You know that you have everything you need on your own system, and you don't have to be good on multiple systems. Then yes, at that point, I would say look seriously at Emacs. Most of the Emacs users that I run into are academics, and they're software developers. So the Linux team, the Linus Torvalds, uses Emacs, a slimmed down version of Emacs. People who are maintaining huge code bases, people that are on the same system all the time, who don't have to bounce around on lots of systems, they almost always, again, the academic world, physicists, people like that, they love Emacs because it's extremely powerful and it's built on Lisp, which is an amazing language, a very functional language that they love to use, and it's fantastic. But once you learn it, you're in that ecosystem. And so if you know you're going to be on that machine and you're only going to be doing a thing, then consider that, right? And then in the same vein is NeoVim. NeoVim is basically Vim on steroids, where they've added a whole plugin architecture in Lua and a bunch of other stuff, taking the whole idea of VI and rewrote all of VI in Vim in Lua, and that allows for lots of expansion and everything. But in my opinion, if you're going to use VI, that's just for people who really, really, really love Vim. They just like the Vim interface and everything. In terms of plugin extensions and all of that stuff, I would say Emacs completely destroys NeoVim on that front, because it's been around a lot longer. It has a much richer ecosystem of plugins. If you're into the plugin world, if you're a Vim user like I am, then my plugins are shell scripts, and I'm using the Vim magic of using the wand command to bring in my shell scripts and integrate them into my editor flow. And a lot of people who reach for NeoVim or even Emacs don't know about that. They don't know how to integrate their Unix filter commands from the command line. And we will be talking at length about all of that, so you can make a solid decision for yourself. And so that's what extension would you use a text editor? Great. I don't think you need extensions in a text editor, as we got many people participating in the chat already. Editors are a very, very, very personal thing, and I'm going to end this video with a plea to everyone who talks about editors. The biggest drama I ever had on Twitch was based on an editor. And I won't get into the drama that happened, but I actually said that I didn't like NeoVim, and was somewhat attacked for saying that. At the time, it was nothing personal. It was just like, I don't think it's a good editor. Here's my reasons. And I was totally attacked, and it blew up into drama, and I said bad things, and they said bad things, and we ended up fighting. I just want to end this video with a plea to everyone. If you are going to profess that your editor is the best, rather than starting with the conclusion that everybody else's editor sucks and yours is the best, maybe start with the point-by-point comparison about why. And by the way, the reason I did this, I have a 12-point. I did a full evaluation of DOVM, and I have a 12 point-by-point evaluation of DOVM and why I don't like it. And I actually went into it wanting to like it. And I actually may still be convinced to use NeoVim if I'm on the same system all the time, which I frequently am. So, there's some people who think Vim is too big a departure from VI. There's AIX and Unix users and people like that who think Vim is a bastardization and nobody should use it. You should only use VI, which is a separate thing. And at least understanding the difference between those things, I think, is valuable for everyone. So if you're going to engage in the my editor is better than yours, I would encourage you to ask the other person what their priorities are, right? Get to understand them so that you can empathize with what they do. And every time when I look back at the drama that I had, the people that were pushing for NeoVim the hardest were people that were doing mostly development. So these would be people in the same category as VS Code people and, IntelliJ, even Eclipse people, and and Emacs people, because they were on the same computer. These are also the same people that were pushing heavily to have Linux on the desktop. Like, I have a desktop, I'm going to put whatever I want on there. I'm going to build up my own development workstation, and I have total control of that, right? So once I understood where they were coming from, I could get behind that decision a lot more. But where I was coming from, which is as a hacker and as an ops person, I need to be good on any system, anytime. That means I need to use and leverage the tools that are on the system. And so my priorities were dramatically different from the priorities of somebody that was pushing for NeoVim like that. Somebody who's got their one system, right? I need to get good with hacking into a system where I don't even have TTY access. I can't even use an editor at all, right? I got to be able to add this, or I've got to be able to cat this, or whatever. The point I'm trying to make is, please seek to understand before you have a fight about something completely stupid, because one of you wants to do one thing and the other one wants to do something completely different. Don't waste your time fighting about that. It's also the same. This argument goes for languages. It goes for the desktop. It goes for any one of these things, right? People are so willing, and myself included, I've been very guilty of this. They're so willing to tell you what to do without seeking to understand what it is you want to do or be. And I'm just going to ask you, in the editor wars, and the feelings have been hurt, marriages have been lost over, preferences about editors, let alone tabs versus spaces, which we'll talk about another time. So the takeaway from this is, I'm just going to net it out. Personally, I think every technologist on the planet should at least be able to be proficient with VS Code, because it's the most popular. It's the most likely you're going to run into that on the job, and with a terminal editor, specifically Vim, the VI and Vim, but Vim primarily, right? So, because these are things that come on the system all the time. So for the beginner boost, we will be learning VS Code and Vim. Those are the two things. Now, if you want to do anything else with that and you want to take it into another angle, and you've got other stuff you want to, I got no problem with that. I do feel very strongly that every single technologist on the planet, no matter what flavor of technical career you have, must understand and be proficient with VS Code and be proficient with Vim, at least enough to be proficient with it when asked to use it. If you were to go to a job interview and they were to ask you, have you ever used Vim, or have you ever used VS Code? And you were to say, no, I've never tried them. I think it's pretty fair to say, you can disagree with me in the comments, but I think it's pretty fair to say that they would be shocked. They would be shocked. Most interviewers would be shocked that you have not even tried it yet. Right. So we're going to use the two most important, most popular, most fundamental, in my opinion, editors on the planet for technology. And I got no problem with you disagreeing with these selections, right? If I were to interview somebody and they said they used Emacs, and I said, but have you ever used Vim, and can you use it? They say, yeah, I can. I don't want to, though. I don't like it. I'm like, ooh, okay. That kind of would make me perk up and think, hey, this person's actually evaluated why this editor is good. And that's why knowing what editor somebody uses is kind of insightful, because if you know that they're using Golang and they know VS Code is a thing, but they want to use Golang because Golang does X and Y and Z better, that is a very well-informed, very autodidactic technologist that I would be curious to know more about them. So that's where I'm coming from. That's a very long video, but I mean, what are you going to expect from a video about editors, right?